And we are live on the Icecast Live. Welcome, everybody, and welcome Sam Morgan out of his cupboard because Ollie's pulled a sickie.
Comic Book Sam, thank you. Don't drop my real name. Oh my god!
Oh my god! You know, how cryptic is your pseudonym though?
It's not though, is it? It's not at all. It's not at all. How are you, Shane?
I'm all right, mate. I'm really glad to be back because obviously I pulled a sickie last time. And then I think we had a week without a show, so it seems like a long time since I've seen you, mate.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, this week Ollie's pulled a sickie or pulled
he's skiving.
Clash.
Yeah, he's skiving, isn't he? You know, we'll let him off. If you're watching, Ollie, hope you have a good night, mate. We'll manage without you. Don't worry. You know, you covered for me last time.
He's not watching.
He's drinking somewhere. Yeah, he's drinking somewhere. So how are you, Sam? You all right? You had a good week?
Very good. Yes, very good. Shane, someone wants to say hello quickly.
Oh. Hi. Hello, Deb. How you doing?
I'm all right, thank you, love. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very nice to see you.
Yeah, you're looking good, man.
Oh, I'm feeling better than I was last week. Let's put it that way. Was it last week or the week before? Yeah. So
2 weeks ago.
Yeah. 2 weeks. Yeah.
Good. Really glad to hear that.
Thank you, and thank you both. I mean, for those out there who don't know, I lost my father a couple of weeks ago, and I had a bit of a bad time. And Sam and Deb here were exceptionally supportive and really helped me through a really, really difficult time. So, as did many people, you know, it was very moving actually. How many people were so kind, but these two guys, I have to say, they were there for me. So, thank you so much.
Lovely.
Yeah,
anytime. You know where we are.
I do indeed. I know where you live.
Right, let's get on with the mindless comic book nonsense then.
Yes. So our guest this week is the one and only, the mighty, I'm sure he's heard that lots of times, Tim Quinn. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tim was at one time Marvel editor, and I think the editor for the Spider-Man Weekly. He may correct me, I may be wrong, but he's done some incredible jobs. And now he is also putting together an event in Liverpool for comics at a cinema. And it looks like a really cool event. I'm going along. I'm going to be there. I don't know if you're thinking of coming along, Sam, but it should be. Sorry?
Yeah. It's a bit closer to Liverpool's a bit closer to you than me, but
yeah.
I was there for my Christmas work too. It was very cold. But I do like Liverpool.
I like Liverpool as well. Yeah. So any excuse to visit, really. But if comics are involved, then even more so. So without any further ado, let's play that VT, Sam, and bring on the guest.
Is it working? Can't tell. I think I may have. Hello, are we still live? We're still live. Everything frozen.
Hello and welcome back to the Icecast, and welcome, Mr. Tim Quinn.
My God, I'm live. And that's amazing at this age. I'm delighted to be live. Hello there, Sam, and hello there's Shane. How are you?
We're good. We're good, aren't we, Sam? We're very happy. Sam's having some technical problems, I think, though, because he keeps saying things out of sync. So, or it could be me. It could be me. I could be having technical problems, but
he's definitely having a technical problem.
Oh yes, he's got the white circle of death. Never mind. So this happens, and we just carry on. Don't worry about it. So you're used to appearing on television, aren't you? You've had a couple of experiences with live TV before, I believe.
I've had a few, indeed. Yes. In fact, here in Liverpool, or Merseyside, we had a fabulous TV station at one point called Bay TV Liverpool. And because I had worked on the South Bank show for many years, producing documentaries, I was pulled in to do all sorts of shows, which was a delight because everywhere you go in Liverpool, there's a story. And also Liverpool sort of is a stopping off post for most people who are on tours. So we tended to do a lot of stuff, which is all up on YouTube. Everything from interviewing Katie Manning, who ended up sitting in my lap.
Oh, really?
First, I've been doing interviews since about 1970, I think, and that was the first one. Where the interviewee ended up sitting in my lap, bless her heart. But yeah, all sorts of names, Eddie Izzard, you name it really. So it's been another part of my life outside of the delightful area of comic books.
Yeah, it is. It's quite a different medium, isn't it? But I think people who are creative, artistic, whatever you want to call it, that, you know, we are prone, creative people, to do lots of different things in lots of different areas, and yet
to bring money in, I think, yeah. I think so. Down the years, certainly that was my the idea behind going into interviewing way back, when I thought, well, I didn't want all my eggs in one comic book basket. Yeah. And so it made sense. And also I was just interested in people. And I thought, well, how cool it would be to interview people that I'm actually interested in. And because I was working for DC Thomson at that time, who had, you know, not only this amazing line of weekly comic books, I mean, countless comics, the newsagents' counters were groaning under the weight of them. But they also had fabulous magazines and newspapers. So, you know, once you were in there, sort of, it was easy to sort of move over and suggest different things. You know, I mean, the very first interview I did was with a Blue Peter presenter way back, a fabulous woman called Leslie Judd, who I adored on screen. And
I'm back. Sorry. Internet problems.
I shall try not to bore you to tears. So that you have to, I think you fell on the floor.
My internet has already given up.
Anyway,
Tim Quinn.
Yes, my computer's down. I haven't heard that one since I don't know when.
Of course, when you came into comics, Tim, I mean, you know, back in the annals of time, the industry was a lot healthier, wasn't it, on both sides of the Atlantic?
I didn't really ask. I just thought I'll just
got on with the job.
So quite how healthy they were, I don't know, because they didn't really flash their sales figures around to me. No. But yeah, I guess it was because number one, I think there was a huge market for children. Yes. Which has kind of been lost. I don't know. There might be people out there who will disagree.
No, I've got 3 kids, and they only ever read manga. So.
Oh, right. Well, there you go. Well, you see, I mean, when I was growing up in the 50s, I mean, and I was lucky enough to have an older brother. So by the time I could sit up, he was already buying the Beano each week and the Lion. So 2 really great comics. And my earliest memories is of flicking through the pages and really wanting to be able to read because of these fabulous illustrations. And I love the fact that you didn't know what was coming on each page, you know, because it was such a variety of wonderful art styles that were extraordinary. And I know I'm speaking now as somebody probably looking back through rose-tinted specs on a delightful childhood, because I was lucky enough to have one. But in actual fact, when I do pull down some of those old comics and whatever, it's incredible work. I mean, those illustrators could draw a dining room table and make it look interesting. You know, it was such fascinating and quite extraordinary styles that were about back then.
And of course, when you're a kid, you don't know often who they are, these artists. They are anonymous, and back then they weren't credited.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I remember seeking the name out, and certainly in the Beano it was Dudley Watkins who was doing Biffo the Bear, and there must have been something else he was doing in there. And that led on to one of the first books I was given, which was an Ora Woolley book from Scotland. And so I kind of learned to read on Ora Woolley and then the Bruins, and to such an extent that I have an old exercise book from my first school, which was a convent school. And I guess I've just learned to read and write. And so I'm about 5 or 6. And I'd write a story about meeting pirates on the shore near my home in Merseyside, in Liverpool. So the shore, we called it the shore. I mean, it's the River Mersey.
Yeah.
And
I've seen it. It's huge. It is like a.
It is like a shore.
Well, it actually links up with the Irish Sea, so so it kind of is. Anyway, in my essay, I wrote something was braw. Somebody said, "Oh, that's braw," and my teacher, this nun, a wonderful old lady, called Sister Ethel Reader, had crossed it out in red ink and said, "There's no such word as braw." And I remember thinking, yes, there is. Ora Woolley says it every week in the Sunday. so it was the moment where I realized teachers are a bit clueless.
They don't know everything.
Like you say, it's the moment when you're reading where you become aware of them, of the artists and writers as actual people, and not just like the comics appearing. Well, and then you start going, and then recognizing the artist, and then seeing it other places, and then learning their names.
I started seeking out the names, and so by the time I was reading Marvel, well, they weren't called Marvel comics; it was Atlas Comics, wasn't it? So this is the 50s when Stan and the gang were doing sort of Twilight Zone kind of stories.
Lots of monster comics, wasn't it?
Great stuff. I love all that stuff.
And I remember loving one story so much that I thought, who's written it? Who's written it? And finding the name Stan Lee. So that's in my head. I was 7 years of age when the name Stan Lee registered in my little pea brain for the first time. And that was before he kicked off the whole 60s thing, with the Fantastic Four. So Stan was already, for me, a master of comics. And of course,
a lot of people forget that he did all this stuff before the Marvel Renaissance. He did so much stuff.
Romance comics, monster comics,
and Steve Ditko as well. I mean, Steve Ditko's
whole gang were there. Don Heck, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, all turning out just amazing work, and really atmospheric work. They really did capture this Twilight Zone kind of oddball universe that we live in. Fantastic. So it was a really incredible precursor to what they then with the whole Marvel universe thing.
It was a last ditch attempt, wasn't it? It's Fantastic Four #1. It was a last ditch. Right? Okay, I'm going to quit comics. Write what you want to write. So it's like, this is what I want to do, and it worked.
Certainly what he told me when I had the delightful task of interviewing him at Stanley when I was working.
Tell us about Stanley. When you met him, how did you find?
I met him years before that, actually. We encountered each other because I found myself in the USA. I fell in love with an American girl, an Indiana girl, and she lived in Indiana. Surprise, surprise. So I went over there. We were in Indianapolis, and I flicked through the yellow pages to see if there were any publishers in town. And to my amazement, I found that the publishing company that produced the Saturday Evening Post magazine were there. Now, I don't know if you two guys remember or have heard of the Saturday Evening Post. It used to be available over here. It's possibly one of America's most famous magazines ever. It was created by Benjamin Franklin back in the 1720s.
That's pretty good credentials, isn't it? Yeah.
Pretty good to start off with. But then in the last century, in the 1900s, it had such names as P.G. Wodehouse, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and perhaps bigger than all of them, Norman Rockwell as the artist, doing many of the covers. Anyway, I was aware of it because we used to get it in the 50s. My mum and dad used to buy this magazine, and it was just one of the best general interest magazines ever. And it really hit a high point in the 60s. It was there at all key moments of the 60s. So as soon as the Beatles hit on Ed Sullivan, the Post were backstage, and they devoted a whole pages and pages and pages to this extraordinary phenomenon, which
Phenomenon.
pretty incredible to get it to say, you know, this isn't just some pop act, this is something else. In fact, one of my collections that I have here in my office is a huge collection of Saturday Evening Posts from way back through.
Wow.
They had them. Not only did they have Norman Rockwell, but they had the most amazing illustrators working for the magazine the whole of the last century. Anyway, I saw they were in town, and I called up to see if I could sell a cartoon to them, and I rang them up and said, I'm over from the UK, and I'm looking to sell cartoons because I worked with different cartoonists at that time, especially Dicky Howett, who is in my eyes just a joyous cartoonist, and we teamed up and we did tons and tons of stuff together. Anyway, I thought, well, this is, you know, maybe I can get in. It was a bit of a cheat, really, because the Saturday Evening Post is an incredibly sophisticated magazine, and our stuff was very Dandy Beano kind of stuff. And that's not knocking the Dandy and Beano.
No, it's just a totally different style and a different audience. Yeah.
The beauty of their, in many ways, kind of scrappy looking work is that it went straight to the heart of a child. But it wasn't Saturday Evening Post kind of technical sophistication. But I didn't care. I was in love with an Indiana girl, and I thought I've got to get a job and call them up. Anyway, for some bizarre reason, instead of being put through to the editor of the magazine, I was put through to the publisher, which is really weird. To this day, I'm like, how did that happen? And she said, okay, well, come and see us. And I said, okay, when? And she said, well, now. And I'd been in the States for about 2 days when this happened.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, this is a bit different to the UK, where, you know, somebody will say, oh, I don't know, maybe what are you doing in May? Or, you know, that kind of nonsense. So I went around there, walk into this building, hand over my portfolio of all sorts of gibberish, and she just flicked through it like this.
Wow.
Handed it back. And she said these words. She said, yeah, well, I don't really know anything about humour. Boy, was that right, as I was to find out.
There's a certain irony to that, wasn't
She said, you're obviously from England. You know, you say you're from England. Whereabouts are you from? And I said, well, Liverpool originally. And she said, oh, very good. She said, Liverpool? I said, yeah. And then she stopped and she thought, and she said, how'd you like to start work on Monday?
Ooh.
I said, doing what? And she stopped and she thought again, and she said, well, you can be our humour editor. You're supposed to be funny from Liverpool, aren't you?
Brilliant.
I said, well,
she probably thought, oh, the Beatles are funny, then
well,
you must be funny.
The word on the street is that yes, we are supposed to be funny. So she said, okay, well, I'll see you here on Monday morning. So I went out to the car where my wife-to-be was waiting. And Jane said, did you sell a cartoon? And I said, I've got a job. And she said, Jane, being much more sensible than me, said, how much? And I went, oh, fuck. And I had to look inside and say, oh, by the way, you know, I just need to clarify, you know, just how much.
Brilliant.
Well, it was a hell of a lot more than the Beano had ever paid me, that's for sure. It was an American size check. And I thought, all right, this will do. I like this country. And so, I mean, the story goes on. And indeed, I turned up there on the Monday, and the first thing I saw was the publisher come running to me. And she said, don't go into the editorial room yet, because I have to fire somebody to make way for you.
Oh, my God. Oh, I felt terrible.
I thought, oh, right. Welcome to America.
You literally had to go and sit. You had to go and sit in a warm seat.
Yeah.
The previous person.
Absolutely. I stood in the foyer for about half an hour, And then this guy comes walking towards me, and he's got all his worldly goods from his office in a box, you know, in a cardboard box. And he looks me up and down, and he says, "Are you the guy from England?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, good luck." And he walked out the building. It was every day from then on proved to be very extraordinary. So I was hired as a humor editor. But on my first day there, the publisher walks into my room and she says, "Right, first thing I want," and I've already got ideas because they've got 7 kids magazines as well. And I'm like, "Great, well, we're going to do gag cartoons for the Saturday Evening Post, and we're going to do strips, really, you know, British style strips for the kids magazines. That will really add something." Anyway, she walks into my office. When I arrived at my office, there was a guy at the door scraping off the other guy's name.
Oh, that's like from a movie. That's from a TV show.
You couldn't write this crap, you know. You really couldn't.
It'd be Tuesday, yeah. It'd be like on the nose.
My publisher walks in and she says, "Right, the first thing I want you to do is to put a book together about AIDS." And I say, "Excuse me?" She said, "I want you to put a book together about the AIDS epidemic." And she then went on to explain that you will be aware of it. I said, "Yes, I am aware of AIDS." I said, "Because I've worked in the theatre in my time and I've lost quite a few friends." This was in the very early days of AIDS, but already I'd lost a handful of dear friends from my theatrical days, pouncing about on the stage. And the publisher says, "Well, one of the problems with AIDS is that people who get it in the US now are being hounded out of their homes and hounded out of their cities and towns."
It was a serious problem, wasn't it? The prejudice against it.
Serious problem. This was people of all ages. And because, she said, of total ignorance. She said, "I want you to put something together that will combat that." And then she turned on her heels and walked out the room. And I'm left thinking, hang on, I'm the guy from the Beano and Sparky and Topper. And what the heck do I? And I sat at a wall.
So did she want you to do it through humour? You know, to sort of satirise the ignorance?
No, there was no talk about doing it through humour. This was typical of this woman. She was truly I've met many publishers, and most of them are a nightmare. Not the current one I'm working with at the moment, I listen to that. But people like Rupert Murdoch and Robert Maxwell, even worse, who I was at the Daily Mirror when he took over, and it changed everything instantly. I mean, these are people who like people to walk in fear. Perhaps the worst one of all was Richard Desmond of the Express. Who total bloody nightmare guy. Allegedly, I should say.
This lady sounds like quite a character, to be honest.
This woman was an extraordinary character.
Yeah.
I want you to picture her. She was about 5'2" at the height. She always wore a lab coat, and she always had a stethoscope around her neck. And
what was her name again?
Her name was Corrie Servas, Servaas, Servaas, and I have to say there's a warm spot in my heart for her. I watched in my first week there. I saw grown men in the editorial department hiding behind their doors when she came down to let rip. I mean, I sat there looking at the wall, trying to think, how do I do this? How do I do this? And I thought, well, I actually want to do it because of the friends I'd lost and the thought that there she is. Yeah, bless her.
Oh, hey, well done, sir.
It's a memorandum. So she
is wearing a lab coat.
She is indeed, but of course, she was very proud of that. She was one of the most extraordinary people I've met in my life. And she would create things at the drop of a hat, some of which worked, some of which were totally insane. and had no hope of working whatsoever. But this AIDS thing, I sat there.
There we go.
I remember
Ronald Reagan appointed Savas to the President's Commission to the HIV epidemic.
Well, indeed he did, and indeed one day, one morning, while I was at the post, I had my office door open, and I suddenly see all these men in suits and dark glasses coming by, and I remember thinking that looks like the bloody Secret Service out of a film, you know. And then following them was Ronald Reagan himself. So the president came to visit.
Wow.
Which again was just one of those surreal moments that seemed to fill my life. We did do the AIDS thing, and I'm delighted to. I like to think, if even in a tiny way, it helped to get rid of the stigma that was attached to the word AIDS at that point in time. And anyway, Stan Lee. Well, that first week, I thought, how do I do this? Maybe I can bring celebrities in on this, which sounds like a bleeding obvious idea now. But no celebrities at that point had come to say anything about AIDS. Nobody had dared. I guess the only one with his name linked to it was Rock Hudson, and that was because he had it, not because he was campaigning there. I had two names in my address book, my celebrity address book. Which has grown since. And one of them was Stan Lee and the other was Yoko Ono. And I wrote letters, because this was before email or anything. So I wrote letters to them both. And 2 days later, I got a call in my office. Is that Tim Quinn? Yeah, this is Yoko Ono. I'd like to say I want to do something with you for this book. And I'm like, wonderful. She said, what can I do? I said, anything. I said, the fact that we can now use your name on the book means everything. Because I said, I want as many celebrities as possible to allow me to use their name. You can send me anything. It can be a poem. It needn't be about AIDS. It can be anything.
Name, isn't it?
I said, that's all I want. And I will put at the bottom of your page a simple AIDS fact like, you cannot catch AIDS by hugging somebody who's suffering from. You know, it was that basic. Because I was aiming it at dodos like myself who knew nothing about you know, well, nobody really knew anything about it. There
was a lot of ignorance, wasn't there? And there was a lot of conflicting information early on.
Because nobody knew. Nobody knew what. But it was
do you remember the advert, the John Hurt advert? That was, I mean, I was only a kid when that came out, and it was like, don't die of ignorance.
Yeah, well, we were very much at a moment where it was a bit like biblical times, where the way they treated the lepers, and people with AIDS were being treated like the lepers were treated in Ben-Hur, for want of a better movie, or you know, where they had to go and live outside the town. I mean, it was that nightmare stuff, and we were living in a so-called civilized nation, and it was the worst of man was coming out. So I like to think we did something. So on that day, Yoko said, "Yeah, I'll do something." And the same day, I got a call from Stan Lee because I had sent it to him as well. Goodness knows what I was thinking. Really, I was just pulling ideas from, you know, maybe something like that. Anyway, Stan said, "Yeah, we got to do something." So that was my first encounter with Stan. And
it could have been a comic book written by Stan Lee and drawn by Yoko Ono. That would have been amazing.
well, happily, my brain didn't work in that direction, Sam. So, and instead, I kept it pretty basic. And but we ended up with over 100 celebrities, and they were the biggest. We had the cast of Cheers, which was as big a program as you could get at that time. You know,
huge,
the rest of the gang, and Gene Wilder, who was a huge name in the movie, Jane Fonda, and so so it was. I remember thinking, because it was an incredibly moving thing to work on, and I just remember thinking again how delighted I was to be expanding the box that I'd built around myself of comic books and interviews. You know, that we can do anything really, you know, and when you're in that lucky position of being able to create books and magazines and whatever, well, how cool is that? I mean, you know, that's just and you kind of, you have a you need to look around and see, you know, what good can we do occasionally? What can we do that might actually help? And it, you know, even if it's in a tiny way, well, that's cool. That's really as cool as it gets. So once I had Stan and Yoko's name, this is what brought the everybody. I contacted the LA Times, and I explained that I was putting this book together for the Saturday Evening Post, and that Stanley and Yoko Ono had come on board, and the LA Times did a front page story of it.
Wow.
And I said, you know, and I'm seeking other celebrity names to endorse this.
That's the perfect paper to get them in as well, isn't it? They all
you could get at that time. Everybody got it, and sure enough, the names just flowed in. You know, I'd get back to I'd go out for lunch, come back, and the girl on woman on reception would say, "Oh, Jane Fonda's left a call for you."
It's a bit surreal, isn't it?
I'm gonna have to get a sound effect soon for all the names you're dropping here.
Yeah, I know. Well, you should read you should indeed read my autobiography, which is coming out very, very soon. And it's dripping with celebrity names. But I like to think there's a story behind the name dropping. You know, believe me, I'm as amazed as anybody that I've had. Thank you very much. I've had the delight to be able to meet some of these wonderful people who, in most cases, have been wonderful. You know, they say you shouldn't meet your heroes, but in my case, I think, with two exceptions that I can think of, which I won't name. You can read about one of them in the book, because there you go. I couldn't resist putting that. I couldn't resist putting that arsehole in.
It is a myth, isn't it, really, that whole don't meet your hero? I mean, yeah, you're always going to have a few arseholes, but 9 times out of 10, I find when I've met my heroes in comics, they've been really nice people, and in some cases have become real friends, you know. I think, you know, most...
people, aren't they? People say about you behind your back, though, Shane.
Yeah, well, there is that. There is that. You're probably right there, Tim. So you obviously spent a lot of time.
Yes.
Sorry, go on, Sam.
No, we were discussing before we went live about. I saw your show in Leamington Spa Art Centre many years ago. And it was really good. And in that show, you do talk a lot about when you were the editor in Marvel UK.
Yeah,
and
well, that was a blast. You know, I mean, I got in way back with DC Thomson initially, which was a fantastic company to learn the ropes with. And it was especially joyous because they had so many weekly comics, so you could easily make a living as a writer, just working for the comics, you know, that they had at that time. Once you were in with an editor, you were in, you know, and I was quite happy to turn out story after story of some of the characters that I had grown up with. You know, I remember taking on Beryl the Peril, which I'd always loved when I was a kid. I loved those stories. And Mickey the Monkey in Topper, and Hungry Horace in Sparky, and Peter Piper, and the list goes on and on and on. And it was a delight to be able to do that, and then to branch out into interviewing people for the Sunday Post and the Weekly News and anything else that they were putting out. Was great, which allowed me to, you know, travel down to London and interview, you know, really interesting people, or people that I thought, you know, I really like them, and it would be really cool to meet them and pull out, I don't know, interesting facts about them. You know, so that just came very naturally to me, and then I had just an interest in I guess.
People.
In people. Yeah, absolutely. In people.
I think you have to have that, don't you? If you're interviewing people, you know, if you're not interested in people, if you're only interested in the subject matter, you're not going to have such an interesting conversation, are you?
Yeah,
You know,
well, people are such oddballs, aren't they? I mean, I'm speaking about myself as much as anybody. You know, I mean, what we go through in this very peculiar little life of ours. It's you know, we talk about comics, but you know, the most extraordinary story of all is our own tale as we plod on through it. You know. And the ups and the downs, you know, the inevitable ups and the downs of any life, and how we cope with it and how other people cope with it. I mean, my book collection here, I mean, probably half of it is autobiographies and biographies, because I'm fascinated with how people cope with whoever they are, whether they're incredibly famous or not. You know, it just how you get through. Not that I'm, you know, I don't want to make life out to be this horrendous thing. I mean, but
there is a theory, isn't there? There is a theory that life is just suffering, and you know, happiness is derived from recognizing the moments that aren't. You know,
well, it's not suffering, and I mean, I hesitate.
Yeah, I don't think that either. I think
I hesitate to say that to you going through what we've been going through in the last few weeks, but. It is inevitable that we all go through such. But for me, life is great joy and absolute horrors, and it's this peculiar mix. And I think we all go through it. You know, nobody sort of gets out of here without that combination of things hitting you. Well,
you can't know you're happy unless you've been sad. So
and I think that's the thing. Knowing that enables you to feel happiness, doesn't it? You know.
Well, I certainly knew I was happy, sort of, pretty much as soon as I was born, and the sadness hit when, for some reason, my parents decided that I had to go to school when I was 4 3/4.
How dare they?
I thought, sod this.
Tell me about my kids. My kids tell me that every day.
Well, yeah, and not only that, though, they decided Catholic school would be the place for me. And this is old school's Catholicism, you know.
So you weren't a fan of school then, Tim? Did you succeed at school? Did you overcome the fact that you didn't like it, or was it just a washout for you?
I excelled at playing truant. From an early age, and no, I look back on it with horror. I had one, possibly two teachers who I'd say were inspirational, and in fact, as I look around my office today, certainly there's signs of one of them who I was lucky enough to have for 2 years, between the age of 9 and 11. So I'm a great believer in inspirational teachers, but no, the school system, the education system when I was a boy, which is the 50s and early 60s, was Victorian. In fact, our textbooks at school were from the 1880s and 1890s. And on my classroom wall, I remember this huge map of the world, and it was all covered in red bits because that's what we owned. So of course the map came from the Victorian era, but we were still banging on about it, you know. And it was a total nonsense. And then you add the whole Catholic bullshit to that. So no, I didn't really. I saw through it all from an early age, or I think I saw through it. You know, I mean, chances are I'm going to die at some point, and I'll find that the Catholics are in charge. So
you'll find a reckoning.
But
we were right, and you made a mistake.
Now go and suffer for eternity, you sinner.
This is why I have planned the deathbed confession, you know, to you, Father, for our sin.
You can with Catholicism, can't you? You can do whatever you want, as long as at the end you go, "Oh, I'm sorry."
They prefer you to do it once a week, but you know.
But still,
I'm saving it up.
Isn't Stalin in heaven, or because he did a deathbed apology?
Stalin.
Stalin. Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know. How does anybody know? I do have frequent visitors from the Jehovah's Witness who come knocking at my door. And my wife always says to me, "Why'd you open it?" And I'd say, "Because I love talking to them. I absolutely get a kick out of giving them equal nonsense back to their nonsense."
I do like actually talking to any religious people who come to the door. I always have a conversation with them because I like to challenge their belief, and but it doesn't take long for them to get bored. They soon go away.
They realise they're barking up the wrong shoe, Shane, and they're not going to get an extra tick in everything, so they're off. Find someone a bit more gullible.
Yeah.
Well, you say that, but I like to have an open mind and think how funny it would be if all these nutcases are right.
It'd be interesting,
the world is so nutty anyway that it might well be that once we've done this, once we drop dead, we head off, and it's all that nonsense up there. I mean,
you drop dead and you go, oh my God, the Seventh-day Adventists were the ones who got it right.
I mean, my wife has a great phrase that she uses, and it's, you know what, you got to laugh. And I think, that will see me through, really, because we tend to use that a lot these days. You know what, you got to laugh. Horrendous things whenever we're sitting watching the bloody news or whatever, and or any of the other knobheads around the world. And it's like, you know what, you got to laugh because you're just sinking in your seat because it's so bloody diabolical these days. And it's, of course, the problem now is it's 24 hours a day. When I was growing up, we just had the 2 TV stations and they were off the air by about 6 o'clock in the evening. So it seemed. So you just had one bit of news. Kennedy has been assassinated. Oh my God. But it gave you time.
That'd keep them going for months, that wouldn't it? Something like that. They wouldn't have to report anything else.
Well, I think it did keep them going for months back then. Yeah, certainly it was certainly a newsworthy story till the Beatles took over.
Indeed. And so, because we skipped a little bit, haven't we? Because we talked about
we've skipped all sorts.
We've skipped all sorts, haven't we? And we've got a short show, so
yeah.
But we went from states.
This is why people must buy the book. I hate these.
Yes, buy the book. Yeah, just buy the book. But we need. I want to talk a little bit about
New Haven Publishing. Is that you can go online and it's New Haven Publishing, which is a great publisher. And I would like to say something briefly about them because they've just decided to create their own comic book line. And
really?
And it's going to be called. Well, it is called the Viking Press Comics. So Viking Press Comics. But if you go online, you can find out all about it. If you go to New Haven Publishing, that's 3 words. New, as in new, not I knew, but new, as in this is brand new. New Haven, Haven Publishing. And it's a really interesting time to be in with them. It's run by a fantastic woman from Norway who's been running the company for about 10 years. And just last year, she decided, you know what? We've got to do something for children, aimed at children. That's when our paths collided. And she immediately took on a novel that had been written by my brother, Jason Quinn, who also works in the comic book world, and myself. We wrote this book purely to amuse ourselves, because we used to write things when we were both kids to amuse ourselves. And sometime last year, Jason said to me, I'm so fed up with idiot things that we can't do and must be careful with in the comic book world. And I said, well, I know that feeling well. I said, you know what? Why don't we get back to that feeling that we had as kids when we just wrote for ourselves and we got as big a kick as we could out of it. So we spent 2 weeks writing this book. I'd write a chapter, send it to him. He'd be inspired. He'd write the next chapter, send it to me. I'd be inspired. And bizarrely, when we read it through, we couldn't see the join. And it hadn't been our plan to send it to a publisher because we wrote it with kids in mind, but also thinking no publisher would ever publish this because it's all the things they would say, oh, we can't do that, we mustn't do that, and you can't do that for children, and we mustn't do. And we bunged all of that into this book. Anyway, this publisher contacted me. Her name's Teddy. And she said, have you got anything? And I said, well, actually, yeah, I've got something on my desktop at the moment. She said, over. And I sent it over to her, this novel. And I thought, I'll hear back saying, oh, we can't do that. You know, I don't think that's going to. And half an hour later, I get this message from her saying, this is exactly the kind of book I'd like to read to my children. And I'm like, this is exactly the kind of publisher I've been seeking all my life. So great. So that's the first book that she put out. It's called The Jolly Bloodbath, and it's
Wow.
for children.
You wouldn't think that would be for kids, would you, with a title like
You
that?
wouldn't. It's the name of a
Yeah.
pirate ship, and
Right.
the main character in it is Captain Murderer.
Brilliant. That's
and
great.
you have to wonder about what Captain Murderer's mother must have been like to name her child Captain Murderer. And anyway, that's the joy of this book, which we're both incredibly proud of. And from that has grown this whole comic book department at New Haven Publishing, and I'm over the moon that it's growing bit by bit by bit. And in fact,
we're always interested to hear about new publishers, on the show.
Yeah,
because,
well, this is definitely one to keep an eye on. In fact, we have 2 books coming out in March. Dicky Howett and I, one being a Doctor Who celebration, because Dicky and I, for 15 years, worked for Marvel Comics' Doctor Who magazine, and we did a funny so-called humor strip at the front of it. That a lot of people seem to like. So we thought, you know what, we haven't done Doctor Who in years, and it's his 60th anniversary, her 60th anniversary. Let's bung in all the Doctors we haven't actually hit in our time on the strip. So we've produced this fat volume of Doctor Who things, taking a humorous look at 60 years of Doctor Who. Behind and in front of the cameras is what we do. So that'll be coming in. And
that sounds fantastic.
And another book that we've done, which is the world's largest superhero team, because it always made me laugh when suddenly the Avengers had like 10,000 people in it. Hang on a minute, this is getting a bit out of control. So we created a superhero team called the Fantastic 400, which is drawn in Dicky's inimitable style, and is basically lunatic adventures of the world's largest superhero team.
That gives you a lot of scope for telling stories with 400 characters, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. And all the sort of wacky things that have happened in superhero comics are sort of brought up in these,
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. That sounds like
it's a lot of fun.
Right up my alley. So. We've had another comment through. Sammy Jinks, hi Sammy. She said, should write a comic about a one-eyed giant cat called Odin. Now I suspect
Sammy might have that cat.
Yes. Is that your cat, Sammy?
That is a great picture of you, Sammy, and I might pinch that and use it as my profile picture from now on. And indeed, I love the name Jinx. That is fantastic second name. It is. I agree. Well, it's funny you should say that, Sammy, because one of the books that I've got lined up to write for New Haven Publishing is the story of the Vikings. So maybe it could be told by
a cat called Odin.
Cat called Odin, yes.
There you go.
I mean, at the moment, I'm a bit at a loss as to where do I start the story of the Vikings? It's such a huge story to tell.
Well, yeah.
So we shall see.
We'll have to get the publisher on the show if possible and find out a little bit more about these comics, because it sounds really exciting. And it's always good to hear about comics that are, predominantly for kids or all ages.
Well, it's all ages. She wants to hit at all ages, and I like that, because I have to say, even when we've done comics, which I suppose you could say are aimed at the Beano age group. I don't view that. I've never written down, never written down. And I like to think, well, it's a bit like just the other day, I picked up an old Orwell book, and indeed an old Tintin book. And
he's back. All right.
Sorry. All right, Sam.
The internet is just kicking me out. It's
I'm sure everywhere. Yes. So,
I think it's people around me just interfering with my signal, because it just drops and then it comes back up. Anyway, sorry, carry on. I don't know what you're talking about. But,
no, and of course I would carry on, but I'm distracted easily. And now
you were talking, I think, about Tintin. I think you mentioned
Tintin.
Sorry,
Tim, please carry on. Every now and again, Sam. the way you pop in and out. It is. It's very strange. Like so,
we were talking about all ages comics, and I think you
all
mentioned
ages comics. Yeah. Well, I've always been a great believer in all ages comics. You know, and I think if you look at some of the Beanos and Dandies and things from way back, they have an appeal to any age, really. And I like to think so anyway. Certainly there's no, and always I'm asked by publishers, what age is this aimed at? And I say, it's just, you know, older, any age. Yeah. It's just supposed to be fun and funny. Or
I mean, there's this fascination, isn't there, these days with, you know, target audiences and people, you know, creators having to sort of second guess what their audience likes and all that.
Well,
sort
my
of
heart
thing.
thinks when I'm handed over to a marketing department, and you know, if I could exterminate anybody off this planet, it would be all the marketing departments.
Marketers.
I've had the horror of having to work with down the years, because they always come up with such shit ideas, and they are clueless buggers. They really are totally clueless buggers.
Sammy Jinx agrees.
I think Sammy agrees. By the way, Sammy has actually worked in comics. I know Sammy. She did some. She did some marketing. Actually, be careful what you say about marketing. She did some marketing. Yeah. She's very good at it. She's very good.
Of course, there are people who are natural at it, but they're never really hired by most bloody companies. It's the most unnatural people that I've found myself. I'm obviously not talking about you, Sammy. I'm talking about the other half-wits. I'm sorry, that didn't sound right either.
You're digging yourself a hole.
I don't mean.
It's like they're all awful, but you're all right.
You're all right. Yeah.
Let's just say I've had bad experiences with marketing departments, particularly at bloody Marvel Comics.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? In fact, here's a lovely tale. I was walking through.
Sorry, Sammy, we've been corrected. Community manager.
You know what? I love community managers. I've worked with several in my life, and I've always got on amazingly well with them.
You got out of that one, didn't you? Well done.
What do you think? Anyway, so I'm going back in time. I'm walking through the mighty Marvel corridors of power in New York City with Stan Lee. He's taking me for lunch. And I comment that because there were a lot of people, you know, we're walking through the bullpen. I said, how many people were there when you were actually entertaining me, Stan, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age? And he said, on a good day, there would be 3 people in the office. I said, how many are there today? He said, there's something like 200 or something.
Yeah.
I said, and do you know them all? He said, I know one thing, and that is that I don't want to know most of them. That was great, because I was already in at Marvel, you know, working for Marvel UK, and I already recognized that problem of there being departments within departments within departments. In fact, another really cool story about Stan is when I was working with the South Bank show and arranged to do this documentary on Marvel comics, and turned up at Marvel in New York with the film crew. And I'm taken to task by the head of marketing at Marvel, who takes me into her office, and she says, now, in this interview, you will not mention DC Comics. Not for a second. And she said, and if you do bring it up, I'm going to be standing just beyond the cameras, and I will stop the interview.
Whoa.
So I go, all right. Of course, I'm thinking, all right, you cunt. But I'm thinking, but I want to do this interview with Stan. So I go in, sit down with Stan, and the camera's all getting set up. I see this woman, for want of a lesser term, standing beyond the camera, and she's looking at me, and I say to Stan, are you okay, Stan? He says, yeah. Now you do know one thing. I said, what? He said, you can ask me anything, but I can only remember things from the last 5 minutes. He was joking, but of course. So my first question was a very simple one. And it was, so Stan, how did it all start? And he said, well, it all started with DC Comics, of course. And for the next 20 minutes, he talked glowingly about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the guys at DC Comics. I'm looking across at this ridiculous person. Of course, there's no way she's going to butt in and stop Stan from talking. And it was so joyous and so right. How can you talk about the history of comics?
Not talk about DC,
without whom none of us would have been there, you know. And Stan recognised that and knew that. So bless his heart. No, Stan was sheer joy, and everything. Having he was my hero from when I was 7, and he became an even bigger hero every time I had dealings with him. Absolutely love him. And the very last piece of work he did, I should say this, he did for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is really.
What was that then? What was that then, Tim?
This is something that I will actually be reading out on stage at this comic convention of my creation.
Which is what we need to be talking about.
Yes. Which is coming up on March the 25th. This year, March the 25th, which is a Saturday, and it's in a place called Waterloo, Liverpool. Not Waterloo in London, Waterloo in Liverpool. It's a beautiful old Art Deco cinema, and I thought, hey, it'd be really nice. In fact, I saw it was on TV a few weeks back on that, what's that station called? Talking Pictures. They did a show live from there, and I thought that's rather nice, and I've done quite a few comic conventions in my time, and I've got a bit cheesed off with the fact that more and more comic book creators themselves are getting pushed aside because it's all Hollywood and TV and whatever. Which, you know, I'm not knocking all those shows. Of course, they're all wonderful and what a joy.
But it's really hard to put on a purely comics show now.
I think back fondly on perhaps my earliest comic convention, when it was very much all the guys from DC Thomson and all the guys from IPC, and they brought over, I think it was the team from Mad Magazine, and it was a really nice connection and really warm. And I thought, you know what, that instead of moaning about it, why don't I attempt to recreate something like that? It might work, it might not work. And so that's the idea behind it. And then I call around some of my friends in the business to see if they would risk coming to this event.
You've got some great people though, haven't you? Do you want to run down the guest list?
I will run them down any day. Yes,
run them down.
We've got the wonderful Charlie Adlard. Need I say more to somebody in Shrewsbury? The guy who I suspect he probably owns Shrewsbury these days. He
Lord of Shrewsbury. Yeah.
He must be the Lord of. Yeah, he should certainly be the Lord Mayor, shouldn't he? Or he should be walking around the streets if that guy's still there, going, "Oh yay, oh yay." I remember from my time in Shrewsbury seeing the town crier.
Oh yeah.
I've stepped back to the time of Brother Cadfell. But Charlie and my paths crossed way in the early days, and in fact I think he heard me on the radio doing something about comics, and he came knocking at my door, and he said, I'm trying to figure out whether I should go into comics or whether I should be a rock drummer. And he showed me his work, and I mean, it was bloody obvious, even before I heard his rock drumming.
Of course, he still is a rock drummer. He's doing both. Yeah,
he's done a lot. And so magnificently. So I've got lovely connections to Charlie going way back. In fact, we did some very early strips that got into the People newspaper. Is the People still out? I don't even look at newspapers.
It doesn't. I don't think it exists anymore.
It was a Sunday newspaper, and we created a strip for it called Catman, which was the adventure of a little superhero. So my advice to Charlie in those days was, you know, you have a real feel for doing funny animal strips. I see this as your future. And if only he had stuck at it, you know, I think he'd really been somewhere today.
He'd have done all right. Yeah.
But he wandered off into some nonsense about zombies, and I don't know what happened. So Charlie's going to be there, unless I've now offended him. And Lee Gallagher, fantastic illustrator from DC and 2000 AD, of course. Just brilliant artist. We've got a fantastic guest coming all the way from Hollywood. I know I said that this is all about comic book people, but there is a real nice connection here. And her name is Candy Milo. Candy Milo. And she's the actress and voiceover artist on just about every animated movie or TV series that Spielberg has done or Disney have done. So she's a huge name, and she has a book out at the moment, which is a fascinating book. And I thought, well, you know, I love animation, and that's a really nice guest to have. So she's coming. We've got Lou Stringer.
Good old Lou.
Who is, for me, one of the finest Dandy Beano Buster kind of.
He's a great cartoonist. He's just brilliant. I mean, he has everything that the old school had from back in the 50s and 60s, but he's also got some extra pizzazz of today. It's just brilliant work. I love everything that he does. I fell in love with Lou's work when I was quite young, when I was reading the Transformers comic, and he did those little Robo-Capers strips.
Well, so again, another guy who's worked for Marvel Comics, you know, whose work was recognized by the people at Marvel and pulled in there, you know, which is a real amazing thing, I think, for any British cartoonist, you know. We've got Nigel Parkinson, who for many years, of course, has been doing Dennis the Menace and many other strips in Beano and Dandy, and his work is a delight. We've got Dicky Howett, who will be appearing there with myself, and talking about our time working for Marvel on Doctor Who and whatever. And we have many other guests.
Many more.
Itself, of course. Oh, my brother Jason Quinn. Jason at this moment, Jason's had a strange career. He's a failed actor, is how I always describe him. And
I'm sure he appreciates that.
we brought it, he's about as camp as it gets. And I brought him into Marvel Comics way back, and his career took off once he left Marvel. And he was headhunted by a company in India, in Delhi, in India. And this is actually, I'll say this: the name of this company is Campfire Graphic Novels. So that's Camp, as in my brother, Camp CAMP.
Oh, right, yeah.
Campfire Graphic Novels, and they do an amazing line of comic books. With
sounds familiar. I'm sure I've come across the Campfire.
You might have. Well, Alan Cowsill, who is another. Well, he's an old mate from my Marvel days. Yeah. And he's the guy who, well, he's done so many things in comics. But chances are, if you ever find yourself in the works, you will find 10 billion copies of his wonderful
artworks. He did a lot of artwork stuff.
Well, he did encyclopedias of DC and Marvel superheroes, which are the best books you can get. But he's also written novels, and I think he's just done Royal Mail stamps featuring the X-Men or something. So his career is again truly astonishing. So he's going. Anyway, Jason's career took off in India, and he won all sorts of awards. He got in with the Gandhi family, and he did the life story of Gandhi as a graphic novel, and it won all sorts of awards. And currently, Jason is the editor and writer of the Batman comic from Panini.
Right, yeah.
It's very nice. So he will be there with an insight into working with DC these days, but also talking about. He also did a graphic novel on the Beatles, and we're going to have one of John Lennon's original bandmates from the Quarrymen there, who's got a book out. moment. So I'm going to get Jason to interview him.
That'll be
And
interesting.
find out what he thinks about being turned into a comic book character.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that we're going to cram in between 10 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evening. And then I think for the rest of the night, the cinema is going to show superhero movies. I know that the one they've got at the moment is the 1966 Batman movies, which is
cool.
I'd like to see on the big screen.
Oh, I love that movie. It's great.
Yeah, me too. Oh, and another guest that we're going to have is Liverpool Heartbeat. And I don't know that you've heard of them, but Liverpool Heartbeat is a children's charity in Merseyside. Okay. They've been around for 20 years. And I teamed up with them about 5 years ago to create literacy projects to go into school, featuring
I remember that project.
Comic
strips. Yeah.
Well, we've now got a whole line of comics that we put into schools, and the whole idea behind them is that they will pull in the non-reader through amazing work. And I use my friends from Marvel Comics and the Beano to do the illustrations in these comics, and indeed Lou Stringer, Nigel Parkinson, Russ Leach, who's a fantastic illustrator, has done tons of work in these comics with me. So Liverpool Heartbeat will be there with the full range of the comics we've turned out, which are very unique. And indeed, in the pages of one of the comics, we will feature the very last thing that Stanley wrote, because he wrote it for Liverpool Heartbeat.
Fantastic.
So
I mean, I remember when I read about your project, actually, I might have even written to you about it. I don't remember, but I remember thinking, what a great idea. That should be happening in every city and every town in the UK. You know,
what's that?
The idea of comics going into the schools,
absolutely,
being used as a literacy aid for reluctant readers.
We've been doing it for 5 years, and it's a delight to see lights going on in the eyes of children, because I go into a lot of schools and have done for about 25 years now, maybe more, both in America and back here in the UK. And you see lights going on that wouldn't otherwise be there. I mean, I like to be, I like to let kids know that there's a whole world out there outside of the academic world that the school might be pounding into them, that there are other worlds that they can find themselves in and end up having happy lives and careers in, So that's my bit with the comics, certainly, because the education system today, I would say personally, my take on it is that it's worse than it was when I was a boy. And when I was a boy, it was a Victorian education system. Now it's something even worse, in that it's created by government and council. And these are all people, the government and council members, you want nowhere near children with their expanded brains and minds. So it's very unfortunate position that children are growing up in today. And that makes me want to do this more and more, and bring more such things to the attention of young people. So that they
let them know that there's opportunities outside of what they're being told about. I mean, I do stuff myself in schools as well, Tim, and every time I go into a school and see those kids' faces light up with the idea that I can create comics, I can tell stories. It's
not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. We are all capable of, and there isn't a way. There are, I don't know what the last count of human beings on this planet are. I remember there being 7 billion, probably 7 billion and 2 by now. That means there's 7 billion and 2 ways of writing. There's 7 billion and 2 ways of drawing. And that's what I attempt to get through to kids. And you do see them recognizing that fact, before you leave the building. And when I pick up a book, I want to hear a new voice. And I want to see a new way of drawing and writing. So that's what I attempt to promote within schools, and certainly we promote it through the pages of our comic books, which have been a fun ride, an interesting thing to do. I mean, a year ago, we had the strange idea. The head of Liverpool Heartbeat came and he said, "Okay, it's time to do another comic. What do you think?" And I said, well, you know, it's going to be the year of the Queen, isn't it? Because they've got the Platinum Jubilee coming up. So I said, I think it would be really cool to do the Queen's life story. And he said, do you think so? And I said, yeah, because I know all my artists will be fascinated to try and capture the periods of her life from the 1920s when she's born all the way through to the present day. And so it turned out. So we put it together. And then we have it printed, and I'm looking at it. I'm thinking, this is great. This is a really nice comic. I love it.
Yeah.
And the head of Liverpool Heartbeat says, do you think we should send one down to the Queen? I said, definitely. So he sent it off. And we heard back that the Queen was delighted with the comic, particularly delighted to see her grandchildren reading her life story. This was the nicest thing we could have heard. Anyway, then she died.
Yeah.
But the week she died, we heard from the palace, or from Windsor Castle, that before she died, she had given an award, a thing called the Queen's Award, to this comic and to this wonderful organisation, Liverpool Heartbeat.
Fantastic.
So Liverpool Heartbeat and its volunteers, its voluntary organisation, have been given the Queen's Award. I have mine. In the other room. That I actually gave it to my wife. But it's the equivalent of the MBE. So it was like, this is, and it was presented to us. It was presented to us by a guy with a sword. So talk about surreal. You know, the surreal. Yeah. Once you get into comics, I think you're guaranteed a very peculiar and interesting and fascinating and bizarre ride.
I'll agree with that.
That's what I've found through this time.
But that is fantastic. So, I mean, we have gone way over the hour, as we often do on this show. But do you know what, Tim? I've enjoyed.
I need an editor. I did tell you that before.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating chat. It really has. I mean, we could probably have you back on another episode because there's so much I know of your career that we haven't even touched upon in this chat.
The circus years. That's where I started. I started in the bloody circus at 16 years of age. I was a clown. Yeah. So, what a surprise, eh? What a surprise.
Yeah.
Yes.
That just seems to make sense somehow.
Well, and it's been downhill ever since.
So Sam asked me to say good night because he had to go and look after his kids. So that's why he hasn't been on the show. This happens
in my time. I'm really tell him I don't believe it for a moment. He doesn't have any kids. So.
Well, I've seen them; they are real.
But I don't blame him.
So, yeah, he says to say good night, and I would like to say a massive thank you, Tim, for coming on tonight. It's been
an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in March at the Plaza Cinema in Waterloo, Liverpool. And anybody else who's listening, anybody else out there, please do come along. It will be a different kind of comic convention, unless you're really old, and then it will be exactly like the comic conventions we used to hold. When you can,
like the old days.
You can actually meet all of the comic professionals, and you can talk to them. There'll be question and answers. I'll be interviewing them on stage. We have special guest stars popping up as well. It should be an enormous amount of fun, particularly if things go a bit wrong, which
they usually do. They usually do. Right. But you just carry on, you know.
You do.
I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The place could burn down, but we won't worry about it.
Oh, we won't mention that to the cinema manager at the moment. No.
No, not from the sounds of the personality you're dealing with there, anyway. So thank you again, Tim, and I will see you in March.
I look forward to it, Shane. All the very best to you, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. All the best.